Creating a question in the form of a mathematical equation. The Blackboard e-learning system allows you to create and add questions in the form of numerical calculation answers inside the online test. This type of question allows you to ask the student a question in the form of a mathematical equation that contains more than one variable, so that the value of these variables changes from one student to another, resulting in a single mathematical equation that has different values for each student. In the end, you will have one mathematical equation, but the numerical values will vary from student to student. The student needs to answer this question by writing only the final answer, which is a number that the student enters in the designated answer box. So in the end, you'll have one mathematical equation, but the numerical values will change from one student to another. The student must answer this question by writing the final answer only. And this answer is a number that the student writes in the box designated for answering the question. The system automatically records the student's solution based on the values of the variables that appear to them in the mathematical equation. It's preferable that Blackboard's interface is in English to prevent display errors with math symbols. Use English in the system to avoid errors when displaying calculations to students. To avoid any errors from the system when displaying the calculation process in front of the students, it's preferable to use English as the language within the learning management system when creating this type of question. To create and add a new question in the form of a mathematical equation, click on the option to create a question. From the drop-down menu, click on the option for mathematical equation. To go to the question creation page, which requires a numerical answer. In the question title box, you can write a title for the question if you want. Then, in the question text box as a question text, start writing the question in detail, along with the variables it contains. Note that each variable should be written between parentheses, with a letter from the English alphabet in between. Also, when writing the parentheses, the keyboard language should be set to English. For example, if this question contains 3 variables, click in the place where you want to write the mathematical variables. If the question text has been written in Arabic, as in this example, you need to change the writing language to English. Then I start writing the first variable between parentheses, using English, by pressing the G key, followed by the D key, on the keyboard, so that the parentheses appear in front of you like this. Then bring the parentheses closer together on the left side of the variable. Then I start writing any letter from the English alphabet, for example the letter X, where the parentheses and the letter written between them refer to the first variable. Then add a comma by pressing the W key on the keyboard. Then leave a space by pressing the spacebar on the keyboard. Then I start writing the second variable between parentheses in the same way as before, but with a different letter between the parentheses than the previous one. For example, in this case, let's use the letter Y. Then add a comma, pressing the W key on the keyboard. Then leave a space by pressing the spacebar on the keyboard. Then I start writing the third variable between parentheses in the same way as before, but with a different letter between the parentheses than the letters used in the other variables. For example, in this case, let's use the letter Z. And you need to repeat these steps for the number of variables that the question contains. After finishing writing the question text and adding the variables inside the question, move to the answer text box, which is the answer formula. Then I start writing the correct answer in the form of a mathematical equation that includes the variables I created in the question text, so that the system can calculate and solve this equation based on the values of the variables. Then this solution is compared with the answer provided by the student, so that the system can automatically record the student's score. In this question, for example, if you want the student to calculate the average of a set of numbers that will appear in the question instead of the variables x, y, and z. So, the answer to this question will be the sum of these numbers divided by their count. So, you need to write the solution to this problem in the system using the math editor by clicking on the decimal fraction option, so that the numerator and denominator appear in the answer text box. In the part for the numerator, start by writing the first variable x, then write the plus sign, then write the second variable, and then write the dot. Then write the third variable z. Then bring the mouse closer to the box for the denominator, and then write the number 3. So the system understands that it will sum the values of the 3 variables that will appear for each student, and then it will divide the total of these numbers by 3. Then this result is compared with the solution that the student provides. In the answer range section, Siraj, set a specific range for the correct answer that you wrote in the answer specification section. The system will consider the student's answer as correct if it falls within the range you specified for the answer. So, if you want the student's correct answer to match exactly with the answer you specified in the correct answer section, write the number 0 in the answer range box. You can also enter a number in this box, whether it's a positive or negative number, in case you want to allow the student's answer to be counted as correct, if it is higher or lower than the correct answer, as long as it falls within the range you specified. Then specify the type of answer range, whether it's numerical or percentage, from the list that appears next to the answer range box. Then decide whether you will allow the student to receive partial credit by clicking on the option to allow granting partial credit, which will reload the page for you, and you will see the option to set a range for granting partial credit. So you can write a range that is either positive or negative. Based on this, the student will be granted a portion of the points allocated for the question, if their answer falls within this range. Then specify whether this range is numerical or percentage. In the section for granting partial credit percentage, write the percentage that you want the student to receive from the total points of my question, if you allow granting partial credit. Then click on the Next button to go to a new page called Define Variables. Define variables. And this shows the number of variables that you created on the previous page, in the question text box, where you can specify the values that can appear to the student for each variable. For example, you can set the minimum value that can appear for the student for the variable x by writing the lowest value in the box, let's say the number 1. Then write the highest value for the same variable. For example, if you wrote the number 1 in the minimum value box for the variable x, and then wrote the number 40 in the maximum value box, this means that a random number will appear for the student between the number 1 and the number 40, and this random number will show up in the question posed to the student, instead of the letter x. And you can specify whether this random number can include decimal places, and you can do that from the list that appears below for the decimal places. Then specify the number of decimal places you want to accompany the number. Or you can exclude the decimal places and stick to whole numbers by leaving this option at 0. Then repeat the minimum and maximum values you want for the other variables, using the same steps mentioned for setting the values of the first variable. And from the part related to editing the set of answers, you need to specify the number of copies you want of this question, so that it shows a different value for each student, or at least for each group of students. Enter 5 in the answer sets box. Click Calculate. 5 questions are generated with different variable values for each student. Then click the Calculate button to move to the Answer Set editing page. It shows that the system creates 5 questions from the same question, but the values of the 3 variables change in each of the 5 questions. So each student sees a version of the question where the variable values differ from another version that their classmate sees. You will also notice that each of the 5 versions shows its own answer, which was calculated by the system. Then the system will automatically compare it with the answer of the student who sees the same values in this version of the question. And after finishing setting up the question, click the Submit button, and there's one more thing. If you want to create a new question of the numerical calculation type, submit and create another one. If you want to create a new question of the numerical calculation type, using the same steps previously shown, and when you finish creating the last question you want to ask in the form of a numerical calculation answer, click the Submit button. You will be taken to the test page, which contains the questions you created. Now, set the score for each question by clicking on the points. Then write the score for the question, and click the Submit button to save the score. Then move on to the next question, and repeat the process for each question. Then click the OK button. When the student opens the online test, the question will appear to them like this, with the numbers inside the question changing from one student to another, as explained. Thank you for following along.